Hey, what is up, everybody? Jeremy here. And guys, I'm very excited for today's episode because I think more than ever, the past probably year and a half has really shown us how much the people on our teams matter. And I don't think it was something we considered as much as we should. And we're going to have somebody that's really going to talk to us about, that as well as burnout today. We have Julia Arndt with us today, and she's really helping people with peak performance within companies. Julia, thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
Yes, I'm super excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, Julia, you've worked with a lot of big name companies, Google, Uber, many different businesses. And I want to find out for you, how did you get into this world of what you do at Peak Performance Method?
Yeah, well, so just a quick background. I think people that hear me speak are probably already wondering where the accent is from. So I'm originally from Germany. That's where I grew up for the first 21 years of my life. And then
my wife's grandmother's from Heidelberg.
Oh, nice. Have you been to Germany?
I have not. Well, I've been to the airport, but that's about it. I have not been to Germany other than an airport.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. So yeah, Germany was kind of my first stop. And then I lived in 5 different countries in the last 14 years for college. I did an international degree in international management. And long story short, I ended up starting to work for Google in 2011 in Dublin, Ireland, and came with Google to Silicon Valley in 2014. And so I worked at Google for 8 years. And in 2018, I experienced my own personal burnout. So I kind of, what they always say, you need to kind of learn, or you basically teach other people what you had to learn the most. And so it was funny because, I always considered myself a super active and healthy person. I was going to the gym 5 or 6 times a week, lifting weights, being super healthy, health conscious, food, etc. And so people would come to me actually in the company. Like my team members were really aware that Julia was the one who we're going for when there were like any wellness needs. So it was really shocking almost to me when I, experienced burnout, and when I went to the doctor eventually and was like, something is not kind of going right with me and I need some help. And they gave me these questionnaires and told me that I suffer anxiety and depression. And I was like, wow, okay, I've never really dealt with that before. I've always had this like nervous feeling in my stomach, but I didn't even know that it was anxiety until someone told me. And so, yeah, that's a very long answer to your question, but that's kind of how I obviously now am still in the corporate world and help employees sustain their performance over time, because I think this is the biggest struggle that people have, that peak performers have, right? Like especially in tech companies, in consulting companies, startup companies, right? Corporate in general, people are hired because they've obviously done something right? They have shown that they are ambitious, that they are peak performers, high performing. But the question always is, how long can you sustain that? And so I always considered myself as a peak performer. I still do. And I was shocked just through my own personal experience, how, things can change and shift.
Well, I guess looking at that, like, where do you think that comes from? Like, is it a cultural thing that, like this is how we work or things like that? Or do you think it's expectations from managers? Like, why do we do that to ourselves? I'm curious what you think from what you observed.
Yeah, great question. I think it's a mix of both. I think people that get into those companies are already naturally super ambitious, right? That's just kind of how they grew to be. Like they were probably, A-grade students in high school and college. They landed the best internships. Like that's just kind of their mindset, right? They've always been the best of the best. They get into these companies, and obviously, even when they are at Google or Facebook or Uber, right? They still want to perform that way. But now all of a sudden, they're not the best of the best anymore. They are one of many, right? Because all of the people that work at these companies are amazing, incredible human beings. I remember,
I think you see that a lot with professional athletes, right? Like you look at them and like in some small town or some university, they were the best player, right? And then they get to, the NFL or Major League Baseball or something, and they're not the best player anymore. There's people that are just as good at them.
Mm-hmm. And that messes with your mind as well, for sure. And I remember I got to Google and, I spoke 3 languages fluently. I lived in a few different countries. I had some amazing internships under my belt. And I got there and I was like, like there's a reason why I got into Google, I think. And then you meet all these other people that speak 5 different languages and have more amazing internships and more amazing experiences, right? And like I think there's this comparison factor and the natural competition that you developed throughout your life because you are a peak performer.
Sure.
And so I think everyone kind of, it's just kind of the same mindset. So to your question, I think it's a mix of, yes, I think it's definitely the people that are working at these companies that have just already these high expectations of themselves, super high standards. And then obviously your manager also has high standards because they're also a peak performer, and the director has high standards because he was also a peak performer. So it's just kind of that mix of people that works together.
I think in some ways as well, what we've kind of been forced to confront with the pandemic and things like that have really made us look at how employees are doing, I think, a lot of times. And it's not something that I think was globally thought about the way it is as well. So I think it's interesting that we're seeing this shift. But I guess if we're looking at companies, how do we, put in the right type of things in our companies so that we're giving employees what they need? Because I don't think these are things that are thought of, right? We look at, we produce XYZ widget. We need this much manpower. We need this many people to do it, but we don't really consider those things. So how do companies set themselves up to help their team that way?
Yeah. Well, so backstory a little bit. When I burned out, I obviously I went actually on a 3 months medical leave. I stayed at home, and I learned a lot about stress management, about anxiety and mental health disorders, and about productivity systems as well, because I think that's kind of what leads to burning out in the first place, because we're not really efficient of how we work. And, one of the biggest questions that I asked myself, and that was one of the biggest realizations for me, was, why did I never hear about this before? Right? Like, I mean, obviously you hear kind of like the whispers on the floor of like people burning out or like having a mental health issue and then staying away from the office for a couple of weeks, but nobody really talks about it. Let's be honest, right? There's a lot of stigma still around mental health. And I think it's just now, like in the last year and a half, since the World Health Organization also obviously recognized burnout as an official disease in May 2019. So even the year after I burned out, there wasn't really a lot of talk about this. And so once I burned out, there was a ton of different resources available, right? I got a medical leave, there were EAP programs in place, and there were internal resources to read
What
about
is an
burnout and mental
what is
health.
an EAP program?
Employee assistance program. So you basically get like therapy, there's like certain hours that you can get therapy for free and talk to professionals that are not linked to the company and things like that. So confidential conversations. And I thought to myself, and then I digged into this and I found statistics of companies, stating that 50% of their workforce is burning out, and people leaving the company because they just don't, that's like their last resort, right? They don't know what else to do. They burn out, they leave. And I'm like, so if we are aware that so many people are burning out and then leave the company or leave the role, right? Go to a different team.
Sure.
Why are we not doing something to prevent this? Like, why are we not like teaching employees on how to better manage stress and where stress comes from in the first place and why it is so destructive, and why also, especially mental health diseases, that doesn't happen overnight. Like, it doesn't happen from one day to another or from 1 week to another. Like, I think it's an accumulation of bad habits and routines accumulating over years, and then people all of a sudden have a panic attack because they've been ignoring the signals that their bodies were giving them for years, right? And then at some point the body is just like, that's not how it's going to work. Like, I need some rest and I need some more time to recharge the batteries. And so that's what I'm super passionate about, as you can tell. That's like my biggest mission today, because I really believe that with the current way of what we know, right, with all of the statistics and the research, and we know people burn out and they do too many things, like, why are we not investing in preventive programs in companies to teach employees on how to sustain their performance from the get-go, and not when they're already burning out and are already kind of struggling?
Do you think one of the bigger issues with this, and I may be totally off base on this, but do you think one of the bigger issues with this also is not having the ability to say no as well. Cause I know like I was horrible with that for the longest time because I like people, you want to please people. And you often agree to things that, you know, you don't want to do or whatever. And then all of a sudden you're surrounded by all these things you've agreed to that you really should be saying no to. Like, do you see that as a bigger part of the problem as well?
100%. So I built something called the peak performance method. And the peak performance method has 9 different components that over the years of my work, I've seen the things that people struggle most with, which basically brings them into that imbalance. And one of the pieces of the peak performance method, one of the 9 components, is how to set boundaries. Because nobody teaches us how to say no. Nobody tells us that it's okay to say no, right? Especially at a company like Google, for example, there's something called googliness. It's like part of their culture, right? Everyone is googly and everyone is doing things for the other person and like is helpful. And so like, it's not really the culture to say no and to set a boundary. And so setting boundaries 100% is one of the really important things that people need to learn in order to better manage their stress levels.
And I think it's some of the really bad advice that's out there in the personal development world and things like that. Because people are always like, "Oh, say yes to everything. You never know what opportunity is going to come from it." But you can create a prison for yourself that way, honestly, and you really can add to the burnout you're already experiencing.
Yes, that's true. It's just I absolutely.
So I guess when you look at it, you know, you burnt out, you know, number of years ago. You learned kind of how to get yourself out of that situation. Like how did your day change after that? And how are you, you know, what are you teaching other people to do to change their day after that?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I started doing was to change my routines, starting with my morning routine. So the first thing I would do before burning out was I would wake up in the morning and I would roll over, take my phone from my bedside table and just lay in bed.
Oh, I do that.
And like, you know, check social media, check messages. Obviously, my family is still in Germany. So like, you know, a lot of messages come in for me overnight. And then check my emails. And so I would start my day feeling anxious. Like that's how I would start my day.
Mm-hmm.
And then when
that's like the worst. You open it up and you see an email and it's not really that urgent, but you decide it's urgent and you have your attention on that. Now you can't do anything else.
Yeah, exactly. Or like, and then everything is kind of already set for the day, right? You get up and get in the shower, but maybe already late, right? Because you've spent way too much time scrolling through social media. And then you get in the shower and you're already feeling kind of anxious because you have that email lingering or that conversation with your stakeholder that needs to get done. And so it just kind of sets, like, I feel like it's just the worst way to start your day. And I obviously didn't realize that for a really long time. But so what I did was I completely shifted my morning routine. And there was a really strict rule for the first hour of my day that I did not look at my phone, because I told myself that I needed to like get my day started before I gave my energy out to other people. And all of the messages that came in overnight and that were waiting for me could also wait another hour. So in that first hour, I was really like, I just left my phone on my bedside table. People sometimes ask, but what do you do with the alarm? You can set your phone on airplane mode, you know, like to make even sure that you're not even seeing messages coming in the first place until you decide when you want to see those messages. Or you can obviously turn your phone off or leave it in another room. There, you know, there are ways to do that. There's not an excuse of I'm using my phone for my alarm kind of a thing. And then I actually started my day with the things that I really love to do. And I'm really big into journaling and writing. And so I would get up in the morning, obviously go in the bathroom, do my morning routine there, and then have a warm glass of lemon water and sit down and write. And then I would usually just write down the thoughts I have on my head, things that happened, and then practice gratitude as kind of the end of the entry.
I think journaling is very, very underrated, right? Because it's one of those things that like you get a thought, right? And the next thing you know, you're thinking about it. But when you put it on paper, you're getting rid of it. So it's at least there. And if it's an idea, you can work it out. But I think it's very underrated.
For sure. There's so much research on the power of journaling. I really love it. I actually just started to create my own journal, which I'm super excited about. But anyway, so that's kind of how I started my day. And then I made my breakfast and then I opened my phone, right? But that first hour of just like focusing on myself instead of immediately giving out my energy to other people significant difference. I also stopped drinking coffee because I am a very anxious person and a pretty highly
How many
sensitive
cups of
person
coffee
as
were you
well.
drinking a day? I was used to be a high school teacher back in 2012, and I was up to
Yeah.
9 cups at one point, and I just wasn't a very
Oh,
happy person.
yeah. No, I never had that many cups of coffee a day, maybe 2 or 3, I would
Okay.
say. So like one in the morning and then maybe one at mid morning and then one after lunch or something like that. But yeah, so that really changed things for me as well. And then just the mindfulness of, how do you spend your day? So a really big shift for me as well was, how do I manage my time? Which, like, all of the things that I'm talking about right now are part of these 9 components in the peak performance method. Because, like, the biggest problem that people have is to like you were saying, setting boundaries and saying no to things.
Yep.
Managing their time, being clear on priorities. There's a lot of research out there. UC Berkeley, for example, brought out a new study earlier this year saying that 23% of people burn out because they are not really clear on their priorities. So what happens when you're not clear on your priorities? You're just reactive and you're just responding to other people's requests. And then at the end of the day, you're like, oh man, I actually didn't get to do the things that I actually felt like I needed to do. So I'm going to stay up 5 more hours and finish this project, or I'm going to work during the weekend in order to get it done. So I think that people underestimate the power of time management and setting boundaries, because if you want to create space for yourself, you need to better manage your time. So that really helped me as well to be a lot more focused in my workday and get the things done that I needed to get done in order to feel accomplished at the end of the day.
Do you see time blocking as a big part of that? Because I know for myself, like, if you can just be doing one thing at a time, you're actually creating time, right? Because if you're doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, like, nothing gets done because you're doing all these things. Like, is time blocking a big part of that for you too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love time blocking. I love different colors on my calendar, and I keep myself accountable to always have a purple block on my calendar every day, which is my self-care block. So what am I doing? Am I hanging out with friends, or do I go for lunch with someone, or do I exercise, right? Yeah, I think time blocking is really important.
Do you have a way that you prioritize, like, what time blocks matter most to you, or what does that look like?
Yeah, well, I have time blocks for obviously my clients and corporate workshops. They're usually red because those are the most important things in my day, right? Because
Sure.
that's how I make money. And then there are blue time blocks on my calendar for all of the things that I need to get done. So like tasks, right? Like I have a YouTube channel. I'm recording content every week. I have a podcast. So there obviously needs to be time for that. And I also have what I found really helpful is to have Calendly. I'm sure a lot of people know this. Calendly helps you to schedule time with other people, and I only have Mondays and Wednesdays available to meet with other people. I don't meet really people on other days. Obviously, if it's a corporate workshop, I do it throughout the whole week, but in order to just manage my time better, I just give specific times where people can meet with me. And that's been so powerful to not be like, I have to be available every single day, but I actually have days where I don't have any meetings at all in order to really focus on the things that I need to get done.
One of the things I do, that's a great thing. And one of the things I do around that too, with like family time, is like sometimes, like, we may have meetings, but I may have a call or my wife may have a call. So we actually set up our Google calendars so they can read each other. Mm-hmm. So when somebody goes to book Calendly, if my wife has something, they can't book something, during when I'm busy, or vice versa. So it kind of really helps you to control, like, mutual time as well, I think, because you can really be effective at that.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Yeah. And, at Google, for example, everyone has access to each other's calendar. So they can just schedule whenever, like, kind of time wherever and whenever they want. And so it's really helpful to have time blocks and to have like specific categories on your calendar to indicate, here's when I'm available and here's when I'm not available, because you could just meet people throughout the whole day. Like, it's a big company, and I know that other companies work that way as well. And it was really funny because when I left Google, initially, when I started my company, my calendar was always full because that's how I was used to operating, right? Like, I felt productive and efficient when my calendar was full with meetings. And so changing that mindset of, hey, like, I can be just as productive or way more productive when I'm actually managing my time, and I have certain time slots where people can meet me, but then I also have certain days where I'm just doing my work, or certain times. That's been a game changer for me.
for our times, we switched to schedule once recently, and for our team. And like one of the things that's a cool feature I haven't seen before is they have a feature that it can check multiple people's calendar if there's an appointment that has to have multiple people on it. So it also at the same time can handle that too. So like time blocking is really vital to really giving you more time. Well, Julia, I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure the people listening have as well. If they want to find out more about you and more about the peak performance method, where's going to be the best place for them to go?
Probably the best place is my website, www.peakperformancemethod.com. And if they are curious about learning how to manage time, because I think that's actually the most important thing to do everything else, right? To manage burnout and to balance your life. Under peakperformancemethod.com/time, they can sign up for a 5-day free time management course. So that would be the best way to get started. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Julia Arndt, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.